Good morning. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the discussions that I've been having lately with men and women around the world. And I find it very intriguing the amount of like minded people, men and women, that have conclusively found possibly a remedy to many of the struggles that all men and women are subject to due to government corruption around the world. And as you know, when we celebrate life, this birthday thing called coming once a year, people often go out and get inebriated. My joy is in communicating with people and finding solutions and resolution to problems that we currently face this day and age. And so one of the topics of discussion was colonizing a community, creating a community. Here in the United States, new counties are no longer created, new towns are no longer created. We don't see that. What we see is a perpetual reoccurrence of the same nightmare over and over and over, where people don't feel competent enough to maintain their own life, to self-govern. They need guidance. They need assistance. They feel that they need the government to do certain things for them. Otherwise, they would be inept and unable to do so. And what we were speaking about yesterday, and why we were traveling from lake to lake to lake and enjoying the beautiful scenery here in Nebraska, the topic of discussion was to gather like-minded individuals in a general area and create a community for which would be conducive for life. And we know there's two things that sustain life. We have water and good food, nutrients for your mind. And we know that we can create those things. And we know that we don't need anything other than those things to sustain life. Now there's the issue of bacteria and waste products and things of that nature. It just so happens that we have engineers and architects that also think like we do. We have very brilliant people throughout the world that are interested in this, what would be considered an experiment. And one of the basis and principles for our thought process was, after reviewing what a small community in Mexico had done, essentially, everybody likes to speak about anarchy and how it's some terrible thing, but let's think about where you're getting your information from when people speak of anarchy. Is it not the government that tells you anarchy is bad? Well, when we review the case in point that the Mexican community had embraced, which was removing their politicians and removing policy enforcers. They removed the lawyers, they got rid of them. Crime plummeted by 98% with the immediate removal of these corrupt entities that were fleecing these people. You have to understand, government does nothing to create. They steal. And they manipulate through language your mind to lead you to believe that they're doing something beneficial for you, but they're not. I don't know how many of you have ever sat at a city council meeting or sat in on a board of directors meeting. But if you ever take the time to go down and sit there and listen, it will very quickly become apparent that it's nothing more than business. You will hear these men and women speak about their need for funds for ambulances and how they're going to generate those funds, how they're going to raise the taxes, how they're going to justify raising said taxes. You will hear them so often tell the policy enforcers, otherwise known as law enforcement officers or police officers, that they need to ramp up their efforts to issue tickets. Now, in a society that's allegedly free, to create statutes, codes, provisions, city ordinances under the juxtaposition that it's for your safety is completely erroneous. The truth of the matter is, they create all this stuff So each and every one of you continually violate statutes, codes, and provisions that otherwise do not apply to you because you're not a federal slave, you're not a federal employee. You, if you choose to be, are not a U.S. citizen. You're presumed and assumed to be a 14th Amendment citizen. But let me remind you what the 14th Amendment is. It was a provision put in place to give men and women, otherwise known as persons, the privilege to do certain things, but it offered them no rights. They got no rights out of the deal. The 14th Amendment isn't about rights at all. It's about your enslavement. The 13th Amendment, however, the true and correct 13th Amendment that was ratified, in fact, shows you a whole different light. So what we're looking at is possibly cultivating a town. So we start talking about where we would do it, why we would do it in certain locations, and we would like your input. The people that are watching this, we would like your input and constructive criticism into how we could develop such a community with knowledgeable, like-minded people who could raise their offspring, teach their offspring, essentially create a community for which we wish to see. You know, we look at Nietzsche, we look at Gandhi, we look at these people, and so often throughout history, they were dismissed as crazy. And I love the word crazy, and here's why. I love it when somebody says, Derek, you're crazy. Thomas Edison was crazy. Benjamin Franklin was crazy. Your founding fathers were absolutely crazy, okay? These people that are so often called crazy, they write books about that alter and change history and the perception of what man is capable of. So with this said, we talked about reverse osmosis systems. We talked about leach fields. We talked about septic tanks. We talked about construction, which many of us are very well versed in construction. But two of the key fundamental elements were water, great soil, and gardening. Those were quintessential for everything that is needed to sustain life. And the first idea was looking at a guy from Alliance, Nebraska, who is around 80 and retired, and he decided that he still needed a purpose in his life. So what he started to do was dig in underground gardens that grow year-round using geothermal energy to ensure that the cost of growing citrus fruit and grapes and these things in underground greenhouses was sustainable and cost effective. And I believe this man has achieved that. In fact, I've seen his garden, and it's absolutely incredible. So knowing that we can do those things and we can provide for each other, then the question became, how do we separate ourselves from the Federal Reserve banking system? Now, we know through study of law that we can, in fact, encompass everything into a trust, a PMA, if you will. There's a number of different methods to executing this process. But we would like your input. Again, we would like to find people that are like-minded that would be willing to experiment and give it a try and see what we can come up with. We know that we have the capability of putting roofs over people's heads. We know that we can build these things. We know that we don't need the permission from an alleged authoritarian dictatorship known as government to do these things. I don't need permission in the morning to flush a toilet. I don't need permission in the morning to put two pieces of wood together. I darn sure don't need their oversight, and I don't need to contribute to their genocide of the world. It's really what they do. If you look at how government functions, they absolutely do nothing productive in society. The only reason government exists is their ability to manipulate language and steal from productive people, okay? So often we look at the wealthy. They hire a bunch of people to do things that they really couldn't do themselves. But that's aside from the point. I don't want to take away from the context here. I think looking at the community in Mexico and what they have done and watching the crime rate plummet by 98% and seeing the removal of the police forces, which are private corporations that operate under Duns and Bradstreet numbers, that are pushing securities and bonds, that are creating fraud, that are fleecing the American people and people, quite frankly, around the world by just ousting them. not a violent revolution, but just flat out ousting them. So we talked about the means of exchange that we would use in order to sustain life that would separate us from any tax liability with using the intellectual property of the Federal Reserve Bank. And we came to this conclusion that one could operate and sustain such a community by inviting people from outside the community to come shop at our garden and utilize our services by the exchange of gold and silver coinage. One proposition was made that they could bring their FRNs to us and we could turn around and exchange their FRNs for silver, give them the silver coins, and you would utilize those silver coins within our little community, within our little shops, within our premises to operate. And that alleviating any claim to taxes, because the only reason you're taxed is because you're using somebody else's intellectual property that you otherwise wouldn't have the use of. So when you're using somebody's stuff through usury, don't you owe them a duty? Don't you owe them something? Of course you do. And by accepting their contract, by using their IOUs, they come back to you and say, okay, well, you've used our intellectual property as a means of trade, and now we want our fair cut of it. You're using our property. So through usury, they're entitled to said compensation. But realistically, it's just the harvesting of energy, because there is no value in the note. The only value is in the substance of life, food, your energy, and what you do with it as a productive man or woman. So with that said, I'd like you guys to think about that idea, provide some insight. Constructive criticism is always welcome, but we're looking at maybe cultivating a small community. And I think, and I know that it's plausible. And looking at other towns that have done away with their police force and hired private security, these town people, men and women, are extremely happy now. The crime has plummeted yet again. Nobody's being pulled over for erroneous tickets on the side of the road with victimless crimes and being fleeced, and they absolutely love it. And in turn, their community is safer, and these people tend to have a little bit more of their energy in reserves and savings versus spending scrupulous amounts of their energy, and I relate energy to FRN notes because it's a means of exchange, to foreign entities that are fleecing them and absolutely do nothing productive in society. So when we look at the things in the Bible where it's telling us that, at one point, bad and evil will be perceived as good, and good and light will be perceived as wrong. We've come into those times, ladies and gentlemen. We're living them now. And so cultivating a small community and leading by example, I think, would be the best alternative route versus bullets, gun, and blood. That's what mankind has done for thousands of years, and nothing has changed. So why wouldn't we just lead by example and create our own communities? There's one perplexing issue, which would be electricity. But I'm telling you now, the governments around the world have suppressed free energy for years, maybe even hundreds of years. Nikola Tesla's patents and things of that nature have all been hidden from you guys, but yet the U.S. military and the DoD, along with other countries, utilize that technology. We have military bases that are completely off the grid and have more than enough energy utilizing other people's technology. Okay, when you patent something with the U.S. government, you unwittingly gift that knowledge to them. Otherwise, they would have never had it. The government creates nothing, ladies and gentlemen. They steal from you. They steal your ideas. They steal your energy. And because of that, they have this power through the manipulation of language over men and women. They've taken over your education systems. Your young, brilliant minds are being molded to do certain things without thought. And it's a scary reality. Your legislators are all bar members for the most part, and they have an agenda to keep their society going by feeding off the productive, because they're not productive in their own ways. They can't go out and build a house. They don't know anything about gardening. They don't know how to go out and create roads. But however, they do know how to manipulate language and get people to do what they want. Think of your legislators as narcissists, because that's exactly what they are. They create statutes, codes, and provisions that otherwise they would never abide by, and yet lead you to believe that you're subjected to them. We see it in Colorado. There was a senator recently pulled over because he didn't have any tags on his plate. Well, he had a special plate that allowed him to travel when you can't. Because if you do it in such a manner, their policy enforcers will come out and put you in a cage. That's not freedom, ladies and gentlemen. That's threat, duress, and coercion. That's theft by taking. That's not what the Constitution was put in place for. That's not what the Bill of Rights were put in place for. Okay, we need to go back and revert to those things. So creating a small community, we could adopt that Constitution. I don't see anything wrong with that charter. I don't see anything wrong with that Constitution. I don't see anything wrong with the Bill of Rights. And we could adopt that in a community and protect ourselves and keep ourselves safe. So with that said, I would love to have some input from you guys. Let me know what you think. We think Nebraska is conducive for this. One, the aquifer that sits underneath Nebraska, I'm telling you right now, there will be wars fought over that water at some point. And the reason for it is the substance of life, okay? And that aquifer is extremely valuable. It's more valuable than any amount of oil, than any amount of gold, than any amount of silver. Without water, life absolutely cannot be sustained. And the greatest wars in the world will be fought over water. And we look at Nestle Corporation that now absorbs such an abundant amount of water for their profit and gain. So think about these things and get back to us. We really want your input. If you would be interested in that, we think Nebraska is conducive, one, because the latitude and longitude is conducive for growing food year-round in underground gardens and atriums. So we recognize that. We realize the soil here is a lot better than most areas. It's easier to dig. It's easier to build. It's easier to put septic tanks in, reverse osmosis systems. And with the technology that is available to us, the only thing that would stifle us to a degree would be electricity. Whether it's needed or not needed is to be decided by others. I think it's a nice, convenient way of staying connected with people, keeping your electronic devices on, and leading by example. Can we pull a community together and show the American people that it can be done without the assistance of government? I believe in each and every one of you, and I believe we can do it. So with that said, I'm going to get off of here. I would love to have your input, and feel free to leave your comments below, and we'll review them and see what we can get done.